Hello, folks. Welcome to the Preamble. My name is Grumsworth. Over here we have Burlokk, and today we're going to be talking about special characters. So then, Burlokk, what do you think to this? Special characters, how special are they exactly?
Oh, special characters. I think they're a little bit too special. What are they? What's going
What are
on?
they? So, in our tabletop games and things like this, many of you will have noticed that we can field some particularly storied, gigantic, really crazy stats wise individual characters. Our special characters, our heroes of legends, and many there are to choose from. To mention a few, your Nagashes, your
Oh,
Abaddons,
oh,
your Corbulos, yeah,
Corbulo, brother,
yeah,
Apothecary Corbulo.
exactly.
Oh, wow.
Your
Okay.
your
Yeah.
Gaz Thraka, all of the characters who have a particular place often in the lore of whatever
hmm
universe you're playing around with, but also often models are made of these guys so you can take them and field them in your own armies as well.
That's right. Yeah. I think special characters are obviously really, really cool. You think
They
about Games
often are.
Workshop, for example. I mean, we're gonna again, we're focusing on Games Workshop, I think, because we're very familiar with their
Yeah, yeah.
their game systems, etc. But we also read a lot of their books published by the Black Library, and you think about a lot of these stories that you read. Dan Abnett, for example, with the Gaunt's Ghosts. You look at
Hmm.
William King with the Gotrek and Felix novels. You look at a whole mixed bag of authors with the Horus Heresy novels. We play games that are based in these universes that we read about in our books and read about in the codexes and the army lists and the rule books. And we think, I really want to play or build this particular army because I really like the story behind these guys, or I really like the way they play in
Hmm.
game.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
sometimes what better way to represent your army or your faction of choice than by having them led to the battle by one of their heroes, one of their legends, one of their
That's
characters.
right.
And it brings that idea of the lore, the game space, the universe, it brings it straight to the tabletop in an identifiable kind of way, doesn't it? I mean, you have Commander Dante of the Blood Angels leading your force. You're going to feel good about that. That's why special characters are really cool, right?
Yeah, it totally is. Yeah, it's bringing them out of the books, out of the lore and the narrative, and making that sort of breeding that setting in your own tabletop game. So
Yeah.
you might be stood in your kitchen there over a dimly lit table with your army of blood angels there marching forward against some terrifying tyrannid monstrosities or something like this.
Yeah.
But also, as that golden boy jumps forward with his jetpack on, swinging his little inferno pistol around, you can get into the idea that you've got Dante here, the chapter master, and all the weight of his story and his deeds kind of rolled in with that individual miniature. And
Yep.
I think they're a really good way of, you can kind of replay their heroic actions,
Yeah.
you can replay their backstory, or you can be taking these guys off on a new adventure, one that has
Story of
yet
your
to
own.
a story of your own, one that has yet to be written. So I think it's this
Yeah.
is this is one of the reasons why special characters are cool, and why including them in your games, it brings more than just their mechanical value, which can often be colossally high as well, can't they? These
Incredible, some of them. Yeah.
these special characters can be absolutely game breaking if they're nice points, if they've got lots of cool abilities, which is almost always the case, isn't it?
And as it should be for a special character such as Dante or Chief Librarian Togurius of the Ultramarines,
Mm,
Marnius Calgar,
mm.
Rabute Gilliman,
Krell?
Krell.
How about Krell?
Krell.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lord Krell. The Black Axe of Krell. What a good weapon that was.
See, so
Raised from the death by Heinrich Kemmler, I believe.
exactly another
Yeah.
belter of a character, but
What a good
so,
hat.
and an excellent hat. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
brilliant robes, fine stuff. Funny pointy hat.
Yeah.
One of those characters, isn't he? Yeah,
Yeah.
that kind of shows where they have extra value here as well, and why many of us own a few of these characters, because we can instantly reference their backstory if we've read into that,
Yeah.
and
They become a centerpiece, don't they?
They do become a centerpiece. Yeah, yeah. Not only with their often very stunning, elaborate models, which break up the kind of line troops of your army, but also it brings more story to the tabletop. Now, this is
Yeah.
not always a good thing, and it's not always something that you probably want to be doing. I
No.
know, I know, we kind of share a similar view, don't we,
Hmm.
Burlokk, on the use of special characters?
Well, in that we don't use them, you mean?
That's right. In that we don't really use them.
Yeah. I mean, I must
Not
admit,
really.
I don't tend to.
No, no.
I have before. Don't get me wrong.
Hmm.
I'm not coming at this from. I'm just going to disregard this whole facet of our game
Of course.
out of hand because I've used special characters before. But I mean, I can give you a tale of using Marnius Calgar and his
Oh
squad of
yeah.
veterans, charging them through the lines of some Tyranids, and him being laid low by a squad of Termagants.
A sad, sad time for the chapter master of the Ultramarines, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, these things can happen, right?
And
So
these things can
your
happen.
glorious commander in charge of the whole chapter, who is, only ever going to be found,
Hundreds of
either
years old.
hundreds of years old, yeah, laid low by some lowly,
Mm.
rank and file alien troops with, hardly any stats to them, just because he rolled a bunch of ones.
It
So
doesn't fit with the kind of the lore and the story. He should be dying to an adversary kind of worthy of him,
yeah,
shouldn't he? Really?
yeah, of course he
Yeah.
should. Yeah. So and in some ways, having those special characters and expecting them to just plow
Live up to
through
their
your
lore.
enemy.
Yeah.
It's a little sad when that doesn't happen, and it's a bit deflating, takes the wind out of your sails a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
um
Is that why
but
you stray away from playing them, do you think?
um partly, but not entirely. I think one of
Okay.
the main reasons why I don't is because I these days I don't really have a lot of time to play very large games. Now,
Yeah.
once or twice a year, yes, definitely, where we play sort of 3, 4, 5,000 points, multiple players around a
Mm.
table. And that kind of situation is a lot more viable, I think, to be able to use something
Yeah.
like
Okay.
a special character like that. But very often they tend to be smaller games, which is fine, up to 1,000, 1,500 points, perhaps even 2,000, which I could consider, in some instances, to be an afternoon of gaming.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But even that, I consider to be sort of somewhat skirmish level. You're talking about forces which only include 6 or 7 squads at the most.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I find it difficult to imagine one of the top dogs, one of the chapter masters or one of the world's most powerful sorcerers or
Hmm.
griffin riding lords,
Mm.
to be heading up such tiny, tiny armies.
Yeah, I
Um,
totally get that also. And I think that's
mm,
one of the reasons why I fall into the sort of same camp as you on that issue.
mm,
I have used special characters in kind of 2000-ish point games and smaller.
mhm,
And sometimes I can kind of puzzle out a little bit of a workaround. Often the sort of engagements that are shown in the lore in these books, they tend to be thousands and thousands and millions of fighting men and women.
yeah,
And
yeah,
your special characters are often, not always, but often the sort of people that are going to be commanding these huge, great forces. So to have them walking around on a tabletop with, as you say, 6 or 7 squads, it kind of makes them being there makes it feel more like a skirmish.
they're big point sink as well, aren't they? They're usually quite expensive in the
Massively,
game.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So a
So,
big
so
chunk of your 2,000 point army will be on that one dude who's
it,
really
yeah,
powerful. Don't get me wrong, but
yeah. He's suddenly not got much of an army, which doesn't
mm,
kind of it makes it less believable or less. You have to work harder to believe that this guy could be in this situation,
yeah, I
and
agree.
and I think that is possible. You can imagine that the particular piece, the particular table that you're playing on, is a small chunk of a much wider battle. You can imagine
Yeah,
that,
like a cross section of a
yeah,
larger battle for sure.
that's
Yeah,
right. Yeah, yeah. If we take your chapter master of a Space Marine chapter there, you could be playing the very spear tip of the Space Marines advance, couldn't you? That's why he's not surrounded in hundreds and hundreds of warriors. That's why he's only got 50. But I do find that that's, for me anyway, that's more often a bit of a reach. It still doesn't quite sit right with me. It's almost like these characters, while I like the way that they're playable on a tabletop and it's interesting to compare their stats against other heroes and things like that,
definitely. Yeah.
it feels less almost enjoyable to see them on the table and to see Calgar laid low by some Hormigans. It's like
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
want to see that.
So when would you, what processes would you go through when you
Mm,
are about to play a game with a special character? What would it take for you to feel like 100% this is going to be amazing because this special character is on this game? What would have
mm.
to happen for you to reach that conclusion?
So I think for myself, there's a couple of ways that that might happen. The first is the straightforward and simple mechanical one. If you're playing a game where narrative isn't too strong a thing, for whatever reason, you might be taking a walk down to a tournament, or you might be having a series of games with your gaming group where the narrative and the idea and the form of the universe that you're playing in, for those games, it's not a big thing. So it's just like build your army to be as overpowered or as effective as is possible. And
Mm.
the fact that you play a special character in that slots in just for that reason.
For your strategic value with
Mm,
regard to game mechanics, this is, yeah?
that's right. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lore wise, that's no longer Mortarion, Primarch of the Death Guard. What it is an amazing game piece. I
Yeah.
mean, Morty is not that. He's really bad at the moment, but that's by the by.
Yeah.
You know. So
Yeah.
the second way I think is where if you're playing through maybe a campaign
Hmm.
and the final stages of this campaign play out, and it makes good sense for there to be almost the campaign has been a run up to this epic moment, this
Yeah.
epic clash between heroes. And
That's
again,
right.
then you can kind of picture maybe that this is the final battle. So
The end boss almost.
like the end boss, yeah, and your
Yeah.
opponent
Yeah.
sort of brings the same maybe, and that works for me rather than having, say, that special character play through in the very first border skirmish, the little sort of 40k and 40 minutes situation where
Yeah.
um, you've just got a single Gazkol Thraka just walking around on his own. That
Yeah.
doesn't
Exactly.
make sense. But if
Yeah.
you're playing a game where it's ramping up and up and up and the points
Hmm.
maybe are increasing, and then
Yeah.
suddenly you plop down big bad old Belisarius call of the
Well,
Adeptus
that's it.
Mechanicum.
Yeah.
He scuttles forwards in all his glory, but for me, it doesn't work if he does that just scuttling around in all his glory, scouting out some buildings. You know,
Yeah, a couple of doodles following him around on a tiny
yeah,
skirmish battlefield. Yeah, it's
exactly.
not so great in those early phases of a campaign. And I think for me, that's my kind of favorite way to play
Yeah,
40k anyway, or any kind of war game, whether it be Flames of War, where we're reenacting some old World War II stuff,
yeah,
or it be Warhammer Fantasy Battle, where you're trying to dominate a shard of magic, or a
hmm,
part of the plane of existence, or you're in a huge system wide campaign battle with multiple forces involved, multiple players in the 40k universe. And I like the idea of playing it that way, where you set a story, you set an
hmm,
objective for both sides, the forces of chaos, the forces of the Imperium, whatever it might be. And you go through a series of events. The outcome of the first game affects the second game, and the points values can
yeah, yeah,
fluctuate depending on the outcome of the last game. You're going to be playing games with your gaming group anyway. So, my opinion is play them, link the games in a little bit of a cool story, get someone involved to do a little bit of writing, maybe get a bit of a
hmm.
GM situation going on
That can
where
really
you've got a
help.
games master helping out using some of the old like Mighty Empires tiles that Games Workshop released. Hard to come by nowadays, I think, but
Hmm.
you can use those to help give yourself a campaign map.
Yeah,
And then, as you say, you get to that end point where your armies have grown and grown, your missions have become more and more vital. and you get through to the point where your Ultramarine forces storming the Necron homeworld, the final ziggurat where Zarek, the Silent King, sits atop this massive pedestal.
Oh,
I
and
don't
he
know,
does that,
perhaps.
doesn't he?
And he does, yeah. And this kind of brings us on, I suppose, to the how the characters are modeled a little bit these days by Games Workshop,
Yeah, okay.
because you can cast your mind back as far as I can, I'm sure, when brother Captain Corbulo of the Blood Angels, he looked about the same size as your average rank and file troop. He
That's
was on
right.
a 25 mil base. He wasn't on a big scenic thing, but he looked different. He looked
He
posh
did.
enough to stand
Yeah,
out, especially in the way you'd when you're painting your miniatures, you'd put a little bit more attention, a bit more detail into these guys, especially as they are special characters.
mm,
Um,
yeah,
you know,
special.
they are special, but they were smaller. They were closer to your everyman on the battlefield. They had, buffs that could affect small units at a time, perhaps,
Hmm.
or your big lord styles, Marnius Calgars and all that. They would have the buffs that everybody in your army gets this bonus, or
Yeah,
certain special characters in Warhammer that allow the battle standard bearers effect to double or triple, even in some cases, to bring entire sweeping buffs to your army. Yet they were still the same kind of size, and you could almost imagine them, as opposed to seeing them physically on the board. How do you think that compares to the models these days, Grumsworth?
I think that's a really good sort of point of contrast, actually. I think special characters from times past, they had some special rules with them. They had their history and their kind of lore, and they would get a sometimes, most of the time, I'd say, reasonably flashy model. I think these days, in almost all systems as well, it tends to be the case that special characters often have to sort of live up visually to the hype of their story and their stats and their
Mm,
usefulness on a battlefield. I think it's kind of really rare these days to see even a sort of a low tier, a kind of cheaper special character who isn't stood on some form of scenic base, maybe to give them
mm,
some extra height, to draw a little bit more of the eye to them.
yep.
I think the kits tend to be larger and more complex now. Specifically talking about Games Workshop, I'd say that's exaggerated to a crazy degree, where
Yeah.
special characters, model wise, are often they often sort of resemble sort of tank sized situations, miniatures
That's
on
right.
large bases, actual kind of centerpieces. As you say, we'll use Corbulo as another good offbeat, interesting example. He kind of just looked like an interestingly posed but fairly generic Space Marine apothecary, didn't he?
Yeah. He had his goblet in one hand and his gun in the other. Or was it his
I, I,
Narthekium
th- no,
gauntlet?
I think he had a chainsword.
Oh, a chainsaw. That was it.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
I
Yeah.
think he
Yeah.
was waving a cup around in the air,
That's
chainsword at
it.
his side. He had popped his helmet off in the style of Space Marine heroes because you have to see their face,
You can
right?
see their blonde flowing locks if they're a blood angel.
That's right, exactly. And he did as well.
He did.
Short locks, I think. But
Yeah,
but
that's it.
that's really interesting. So his kind of design cues and everything were really understated.
Mm,
Whereas if Brother Corbulo were released now, I assume that he would have some dead and dying Astartes at his feet.
yep.
He would be stood on a big old pile of rocks to give him some height. There would
He'd
probably be,
undoubtedly have some attendants, wouldn't he, with him?
he might have some attendants with him as well. You're
Yep.
quite right. There'd be some sort of radiance rippling around his cup.
Oh, yeah, of
Um,
course.
you know, I
Yeah,
think,
billowing smoke or steam or something
and
from
talking of
somewhere.
billowing, he would probably have an overlarge cloak as well,
He probably would.
which is
Yeah.
that's all fine. I think I would say special characters in this day and age, their models are more elaborate and they look cool for that. But I think it does maybe rob us somewhat of some of the sort of smaller, almost men and women of the line sort of characters. Those kind
Yeah.
of low rankers, they're not much better than the sort of elite kind of soldiers or
Yep.
whatnot in your army. They're a little bit better, but they're not. They're not the Silent King, and
Yeah.
the they're not a Primarch. You know,
They're not
they're not.
Marnius Calgar, or they're not Rabute Gilliman, for example,
That's
are
right.
they?
No,
A
no.
Primarch of the line, one of the most legendary characters in all of 40K's lore.
Yeah,
Suddenly he's on every board. It robs you a little bit of the majesty and specialness
I think
of
so.
a
Yeah.
special character.
Actually, there's an interesting that makes me think to a little bit of a side quest, but not entirely.
Mm,
So you can get in this day and age, if we're applying this sort of logic, this idea to 40k, there are a couple of armies even that essentially, lore-wise, are an army of special characters. I'm staring at the boys in gold specifically,
mm.
the Adeptus Custodes. So I get that same feeling. Seeing them on a board kind of robs them a little bit of some of their majesty and their might
And their mystery.
and their mystery as well, that's a really good thing to bring up concerning special characters, because where
Yeah.
their feats of bravery and heroism and stuff like this, or just their bloody minded berserking, it's nice to know that these characters do still have a bit of mystery about them. You don't know when they're going to turn up or what
Yeah.
they're up to while you're playing your games with old Sergeant Gustavo of the Imperial Guard, who's he's just a sergeant with a las pistol and chainsaw.
Yeah. Yeah.
Over
And
the
it
other
allows,
end,
I think, it allows you to sort of, if you don't have your special characters on your board, it does allow that Sergeant Gustavo
to shine.
over the course of a few games. He's the
Yeah,
one that always survived. Give him
that's
a
right.
little bit of a backstory. Make your own special
Yeah,
characters in that
that's
sense,
right.
and then
Yeah.
you'll find that these things happen quite organically.
I
Um,
mean, don't go and sit him on a massive, um, super armored, really tooled up sort of floating throne, because that's not how Gustavo travels to battle. That
he
is
travels
how
to battle on the wings of his own charisma.
he does that in the hopes and dreams of his fellow Cadian shock troops, or just parked on the sort of bonnet of a chimera, yeah, just
That's it.
hanging off the side of it. So I think
Yeah.
the sort of the idea of a special character, like, I don't think that they have to be absolutely god tier
Mm.
to kind of be special to you, which is why I think we're probably on the same page here. Some of the characters that we might have used in our own games are ones that we've sort of homebrewed, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah. Big time. Yeah. And I think also the idea of having you know, special characters, on every battlefield,
Mm.
um, it means that
Takes
you're
a lot
kind
away.
of takes a lot away from that process of tooling up your own captain, giving him
Mm.
a bit of a name. Maybe it's
Mm.
just us. Maybe we like to play these games narratively, but I don't think so. I think that's something that most 40k gamers out there would really enjoy and
Mhm.
do really enjoy it. But because these miniatures are like beacons,
They
if I
are
have
as
an
well. Yeah.
Ultramarines army or a Necron army, if I own a Necron army, I must go out and buy Zarek the Silent King because he's huge. He's really good in the game, and the model looks fantastic. But I do feel as though there's just a little bit of bleed over from, say, with 40k, for example, from Age of Sigmar, and
Yeah.
the idea that
Yeah.
some of these characters are humongous, they're grandiose, they're
Mm.
majestic, they're large, they're expensive.
They are
Not just in
expensive.
money either, not in good old English shekels,
Mm.
but in points value as well.
Valuable
Um,
points. Yeah. Yeah.
I think some of that ideology and design, has come over into the realms of 40k quite a lot now.
Mm.
I think a little to its detriment.
You do. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you don't have to use them. I mean, you could just say, "Well, I'm not going to use Sarek. I don't like the model." And that's fine.
That was just what I was going to say, actually. I think it's nice that they have these almost over the top representations of these characters of legend for people who do want to bring them to the tabletop, and people that do want to play those apocalypse size sort of games where, for me, that character would fit in on the battlefield. Whether he's
Yeah,
on a massive floating chair or not, that's by the by. It's a cool model if we're talking about the Silent King there, and things like the models of the Primarchs for use in 40k or the
yeah,
30k, the Forge World versions, things like that. I would actually say that 40k and Age of Sigmar, they've kind of interpollinated with each other quite a lot,
yeah. I agree.
totally on purpose. And I think that's fine, because I can still play my games with Sergeant Gustavo as the real hero. I don't need to have anyone bigger than that. But people who want to play with these types of characters, I like that there's the option for them to do so. I think that the one thing that I really like that you touched on there is the fact that when a miniature and a rule set are released for these sort of characters, some of the mystery is dispelled.
And that is quite sad in a way.
It is quite sad in a way. It is quite sad, but I think it's okay, because, say, Games Workshop, for example, they will never be able to release, even if they worked non-stop, they'll never be able to release all of the sort of special characters lore-wise that we know and love. So there's plenty still in the lore, special characters-wise, that are hidden from us.
Exactly. And if you cast your mind back far enough to some of the old Codex books, there may well be some characters that have already been written up by Games Workshop officially as special characters, but never have a model made for them.
Yeah,
so you
they were the days,
dip back into the those past books. And if you've got yourself a Blood Angels army and you want to just give them a bit of an interesting backstory, or you got a veteran sergeant, you could call this guy a veteran sergeant. That's right. You could call him.
Yeah.
You could say that this guy is veteran sergeant so and so from the time of Legends. One of the firstborn.
One of the firstborn.
But I mean, to all you listeners out there, let us know though if you think special characters are good, if you use them in your battles and in your games, or if you like to play narratively. That would be lovely to hear your thoughts on it.
Or the combination, the fusing of both. You know, I mean, in your world, in your story of it, old Sergeant Gustavo there, he's the one responsible for the death of Corbulo.
Oh, yeah.
Laying low old Corbulo with his las pistol. Yeah. Maybe Krell turns up. Who knows?
That's it. He kills the new Teclis with a swing of the black axe.
Oh, imagine it. Well,
I can.
When the new Krell model is released, which I hear is on its way, right?
Oh.
So when it's on its way with his black axe there, he's probably going to look like 10 feet tall. And he'll be on a cloud of spirits and stuff like that. And he'll be able to like nose to nose with Teclis floating high up in the air with his sort of beak.
Rubbing shoulders with Nagash, quite literally.
That's right.
He'd be that big.
Quite literally. Yeah. So they are our thoughts on special characters. They're pretty special, aren't they?
They are pretty special. And on that note, thanks so much for tuning in, folks. Those are our thoughts on special characters. Those have been our thoughts on special characters. Perhaps they've been useful in some way to you. Let us know your thoughts again below. Like, subscribe, and use the code in our notes for 10% off everything at roguesgaming.com. It helps us out a little bit, and it can save you a bit of cash. But it seems, Grumsworth, that old Father Time.
Oh, yeah.
He beckons and he calls for his quote.
Does he now? He's always so thirsty for those quotes, isn't he, old Father Time? Who is going to offer this quote this fine day?
I shall, I think. It is a shifting, uncertain thing which changes as you consider it, which is changed by the very act of observation. A powerful man is not a man who dissects the universe like a puzzle box, examining it piece by piece and measuring each piece with scientific precision. A powerful man has only to look upon the universe to change it.
You've been listening to The Preamble. Find us on YouTube, Spotify, and many other podcast platforms. If you want to contact us, just send an email to thepreamble@gmail.com or find us at The Preamble on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Your hosts were Grumsworth and Burlokk, brought to you by roguesgaming.com.